and welcome to BYJU'S 6th, 7th and 8th grade channel. I'm your teacher Aishwarya and I welcome you to this video where we are going to be discussing the topic heterotrophic mode of nutrition and its type. Now this right here is a very important concept from the chapter Nutrition in Plants, so I hope that all of you are excited. Now if you find this video helpful, don't forget to hit the like button on this video and hit the subscribe button on the channel. So without wasting any more time students, let's get started. Now before I get directly started with the topic of heterotrophic mode of nutrition, let's have a basic recall of what is nutrition and its different types. Now we know that nutrition is nothing but the mode of intake of food and its utilization. And there are two types of nutrition, or we can say that there are two modes of nutrition, where we have autotrophic mode and heterotrophic mode. Now in autotrophic mode of nutrition, we know that organisms have the ability to prepare their own food and are not dependent on other organisms for food, which is why we call them as autotrophs. Now one of the most common examples of autotrophs include green plants. Along with that we also have cyanobacteria and green algae which have the ability to prepare their own food. And especially in the case of green plants, we see that they prepare their own food by the process of photosynthesis. Now photosynthesis is the process by which carbon dioxide and water combine in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll in order to prepare their own food, which is in the form of glucose, which is a carbohydrate. And we know that oxygen here is given out as a byproduct. Now we know that oxygen is extremely essential for living organisms, which is why this right here is a crucial process. Now glucose that is there is produced in large amounts, and excess of glucose gets stored in the plant body in the form of starch. Now this concludes our understanding of photosynthesis. Then what is heterotrophic mode of nutrition? Now heterotrophic mode of nutrition is a mode of nutrition wherein we observe that living organisms don't have the ability to make their own food within their body, which means that they are then dependent on other organisms for food. Now let's take a few examples to understand this better. Now let's take the example of the deer that we see on screen. The deer right here is going to often feed on, let's say, green plants or grass that it sees, right? So here I can say that its food source is a plant, yes? But at the same time, the deer in itself is a food source, let's say, for a tiger or a lion. Now at the same time, if we were to take the example of a bear, right? A bear would be often found feeding on fruits, nuts or small plant-based food. And along with that, it would also feed on smaller animals as well. So from this, what do we understand? We see that all of them cannot prepare their own food, which means that they exhibit heterotrophic mode of nutrition and hence come under the category of heterotrophs. But most importantly, we also see that it's not the same type of food that heterotrophs are eating. Heterotrophs again show different ways in which they are dependent on other organisms for food, which is why under heterotrophic mode of nutrition, we see that there are a few kinds, wherein we observe that there is saprophytic mode, we have parasitic mode, we have symbiotic association, and along with that we have a category of organisms which we understand as insectivorous plants. So let's elaborate on all of these concepts in great detail. Now, I'll not directly start telling you what is saprotrophic mode of nutrition or what is parasitic mode, but rather we're going to understand this better by observing some things that we see in our day-to-day life, because that's how we learn better, by observing and then inferring. So let's have an observation here. I'm sure that all of us would purchase bread at home, and if not bread, you would obviously see that, let's say when we make chapati dough, or let's say when we make any kind of item and we leave it outside for a long period of time, eventually we will see some patches like this growing. Now in the case of bread, what will you see? You will see this grayish greenish patch on it. I'm sure all of us have seen at some point. Now in case if you have not seen it, please next time, if at all, let's say at home they've left the bread out for a long time and it's crossed its expiry date, then you can have a look. This will definitely start to grow, right? So this right here are some greenish patches that we observe. Now this particular thing that we observe here is coming under a category, or the organism comes under a category called as fungi. And we say that they exhibit saprotrophic mode of nutrition. Now, what do we mean by saprotrophic mode? Saprotrophic mode means that these are organisms that are found growing on dead and decaying matter. So let's understand each word one by one. Now, let's say when you go to a forest, right? Let's take a very simple example. I'm going to go to my classic black screen to explain this. Let's assume that we go to a forest. Yes? And in this forest, let's say there would be some dead leaves on the floor that will fall down, right? Or maybe there are some dead insects also, right? So let's assume these are some dead insects. And along with this, we see that there are some dead leaves and everything which are growing. Now, after some time, let's assume after a few weeks or maybe even a few months, or let's take about a year or so, do you think that I am going to find the same dead leaf at that very same spot? Or I will find the same dead insect? I may or may not find it, right? And even if I do find it, it will not be in the initial form that I saw. If the leaf had this particular shape, eventually it will start to break down, right? It will eventually start to break down and maybe it might become like a mush kind of thing that would be there. Yes? So in this particular case, what has happened? The living organism is no longer living. It is dead, right? So now this dead organism serves as a food source for these fungi. So there are these tiny living organisms called as fungi which are found feeding on dead matter or decaying matter. Now, what is decaying matter? Decaying matter means that they are slowly getting broken down into smaller soluble substances. So, this leaf is now at its chemical level, right? Or let's say if you look at closely at the leaf, it is slowly getting broken down into its respective nutrients. So this process of breakdown of this complex substance, right, let's say by the fungi, we call this process as decaying that we observe, right? So in such a case, what do you see? Fungi are found growing where? On dead and decaying matter. Now, in the case of bread, or when you take in the case of, let's say, vegetables, after one point, they are no longer usable, right? So, they serve as a food source or they serve as a source for these fungi to grow. So, we see that the fungi growing on bread is normally called as bread mold, or scientifically, it is known as rhizopus, right? So, this right here is important to understand. Now, a few other examples of fungi include mushrooms that we commonly see. Yes, so we see that this right here is again an example. Now, we see that there are a few conditions that it requires to grow. So, we see that they require a warm and humid climate. That means that the temperature should be slightly higher. And we also see that there needs to be some moisture or water available for them to grow. And along with that, we also see that in warm regions, they are able to grow better and they are also able to grow faster. Which is why, if you notice, normally during summers, your food tend to get spoiled faster, right? Or we see that these bread mold that is there tend to grow faster on the bread because the climatic conditions, and if there is moisture or humidity in the environment, then it supports their growth. So quickly to recall, in saprotrophic mode of nutrition, we see that organisms are found growing on dead and decaying matter. We see that examples include bread mold, mushrooms, and various other examples of fungi. They are naturally found in the soil. Some of them are also found, let's say, in various other environmental regions, right? So in such a case, we see that they require a warm and humid climate in order to grow. So this is all about saprotrophic mode of nutrition. Now let's move on to the next kind. Now in the next kind, again, we're going to make an observation. Now normally, if you've ever been on treks, right, or if nothing, if you would have seen these movies which are shot in the forest, or if you would have seen where, you know, the hero is going through a dense jungle, you would obviously observe that on the trees, on the bark of the trees, we will see these greenish patches, right? Now these greenish patches, we might think, okay, this could be plants. But they don't have a root, stem, leaf. They don't have a definite structure. They just look like a green patch that has been there on the tree, right? Just like imagine if there is a patch on our wall, it will look something like that, right? So what exactly is this? Now, if I look closely, if I zoom into it, it's going to look something like this. Now, this structure right here is what we call as a lichen. And lichen is formed by the combination of two organisms. It is found as a combination of algae and fungi. Now think of it as if there was a chance where you could live with your best friend in your house. Or let's say, your best friend comes over and she's going to live with you for the rest of the time in your own house, right? How much fun would that be? You both would be very happy to live together. You might be playing games, you might be playing video games, you might be talking all night, you will help each other out, and there's going to be a lot of helping that is going to happen. You will not be like, I won't do this or you won't do that. You're going to help each other out, right? So think of it as this lichen is formed as a combination of two organisms which are very good friends, or they are best friends. So here we see that the fungi, just as we learned right now, fungi are organisms that cannot make their own food, right? So we see that this right here is a heterotroph, so normally found growing on dead and decaying matter, while algae, as we all know, have the ability to prepare its own food. Yes? So in such a case, what happens is they decide to help each other out when they come together to form this association, or when they come together to form the lichen. So here what happens is that fungi here acts as a host, right? It provides shelter it provides shelter to the algae. While the algae, on the other hand, will synthesize food and it will provide food to the fungi. So in such a case, what is happening? They are both helping each other out, which is why this kind of an association or this kind of mutual relationship that we observe is what we call as symbiosis, or we call it a symbiotic association. So think of it this way. A symbiotic association is formed by two organisms which are best friends with each other. They want to help each other out. So here what is the fungi doing? How is fungi helping the algae? By giving shelter to the algae. And how is algae helping the fungi? It is cooking, or it's not cooking of course, but it is making food for the fungi so that it can survive. And this association is what we observe in lichens. Now, is it seen only in lichens? Absolutely not. We also see it in leguminous plants, right? So in such a case, in leguminous plants, which mainly include your peas, beans and all of that, we see that in the roots of these plants, we see that there are certain microorganisms, or there is a certain kind of bacteria that is found living in these root nodules. What are root nodules? They are these small, so this is the root, right? We see that there are these small bulges, right? Small round structures that we observe, inside which the algae will be, inside which the bacteria will be present, right? What is the name of the bacteria? It is rhizobium. So here the leguminous plant will provide food and shelter to the rhizobium, while in turn the rhizobium will help in making sure that the plant is able to utilize nitrogen, right? It will make the soil rich in nitrogen that is necessary for plants to grow and survive. So this is about symbiotic association, where we had a look at two examples. Now let's make our third observation. Now if normally you would have seen, right? At times we would see that there are some plants which are not green in color. Now you must be telling Kim, Arey ma'am, there is a plant, I can see it is green in color, but over that you've put some yellow threads on it, right? You've put some yellow threads and you are telling me that plant is not yellow. That is not even a plant. Now, you would be surprised. If you've heard about it, then it's amazing. If you haven't, then you will realize that what you see as yellow threads on a plant is actually not threads, but rather it is a type of plant which has long tubular structures, right? So they are long tubular structures, and as you can see, it is not green in color, or it is non-green. So if it is not green, do you think it will have chlorophyll? No, right? If chlorophyll is there, it will impart a green color to it, more or less. Yes? But in this case, we see that chlorophyll is absent and it is non-green. That means that it is not going to synthesize its own food. So in such a case, such plants, and there are examples of the same, this plant right here is called as cuscuta, or often commonly known as amarbel, right? Now this is found growing on a plant. And we see that we call this plant as a parasite. Now, why do we call it as a parasite? We call it as a parasite because now we know that cuscuta can't make its own food, right? So, if cuscuta cannot make its own food, then it is dependent on another organism. So, here what happens is that this will now be dependent on this host plant. So let's call this as plant A. It is going to be dependent on plant A entirely. Now, poor plant A is doing all the hard work and it is, synthesizing food and everything. Cuscuta is just going to take, right? We see that the Cuscuta is just going to take the nutrition or suck the nutrition out of the plant A. And we call this plant as the host plant, right? Host plant is a plant which has the ability, right? We see that the host plant is the plant on which synthesizes its own food and the parasite grows on, right? And we see that the parasite is an organism that derives its nutrition entirely from the host. Now we see that it has these sucking structures that will help in taking the food from the host plant, and it will thereby weaken the host plant. Now think of it this way. Now imagine in my house, I am going to work every day. I am making sure that, I work day in, day out and, I put food on the plate and I, earn my salary of, let's say, 10,000 rupees and I keep saving that. That means every month I am the one going to office, I am the one earning 10,000 rupees and I am putting it on the safe. And then you think about a robber who comes into my house. Has robber worked day in, day out to get 10,000 rupees? No. Who has done the hard work? Me. But the robber comes in and takes it all for himself. Now, pura ka pura, if he takes and goes, then I will realize, right? Or I might not be able to survive. Now, think of this robber as a very smart robber who will take, let's say, 500 rupees every 3-4 days, right? So, that means he is slowly taking all the money away from me, right? But who's really doing the work of getting the money? That is me. So, think of this relationship as what you see with a parasite. Parasite is not synthesizing food. Who is synthesizing food? Host is synthesizing. But what is parasite doing? Taking all the nutrition away from the host, right? So what will happen if you take food away from the host? Host is going to become weak, right? Now in such a case, we see that parasites will weaken the host, but it will never kill the host. Why would it never kill the host? Because imagine if host stops making food altogether. Imagine if I stop earning altogether. Where will robber take the money from? He can't take money from me, right? Similarly, if let's say that the host stops synthesizing food, parasite cannot survive. Simple. So that's why they will ensure that they will never kill the host, but they will always weaken the host. Now we also see that this type of relationship is what we call as parasitic relationship or parasitic nutrition. We also see it in animals like, let's say, leeches. We would have all seen leeches or lice that come in our head. Yes? What happens when the lice is on our head? I'm sure at some point we have all got hair lice. What do we feel? Lot of itchiness, right? We keep itching and scratching. Now what is really happening there? The lice is actually biting and sucking the blood, right? And when it sucks the blood, as a reaction to it, we feel that itchiness. But they are actually taking away the nutrients or nutrition from our body. So leeches, hair lice are all examples of bed bugs. They are all other examples of organisms that exhibit parasitic mode of nutrition. So with this, we're going to make our last observation for this particular class. Now, have you ever noticed? I'm sure that in the beginning of the class, if you would have seen the picture, and you see this picture right now, have you ever seen a plant eat an insect? Now, some of you must be thinking, ma'am, what is wrong with you? Plant is eating insect. I have always seen some insects eating the plant, but I have never seen anything vice versa. Now, in case if you haven't, you should definitely watch that video where you see, let's say, a pitcher plant eating an insect or a Venus flytrap eating an insect. Now, specifically, I took some examples, right? I took an example of a pitcher plant and I took an example of a Venus flytrap. I did not take examples of, let's say, hibiscus or rose, but I took specific examples. Now, what is so special about them? Now, these are organisms which are seen feeding on insects, which is why often they come under the category of insectivorous plants. That means these are plants which feed on insects. Now, if you look at it, this particular jug that you see, right? This looks like a jug or a pitcher. Now, this right here is actually the leaf of the plant. And this leaf is modified in order to trap and feed on the insect. So we see here that leaves are modified in order to feed on the insect. Now, does this mean that the source of food is the insect? Absolutely not. understand that insects right here are the primary source of nitrogen, or let's say they require it for mainly for this particular nutrient, which is nitrogen. Now, why so? Why is it reaching out to insects for nitrogen? Now, naturally, we see that they were found growing on soil that did not have nitrogen, which is why over a period of time, they had to modify themselves so that they could obtain nitrogen, which is why we see that they captured insects in order to fulfill their nitrogen requirement. So we see here that there are these sticky ends which are there at the tip of the jug. And they are brightly colored and attractive. So the insect gets attracted to the pitcher plant and then they come and they will sit here. Now once they sit, they are trapped. Once they trap, the lid will close shut and then inside it will go inside the pitcher where a lot of juices are secreted, where the insect is then digested and they use it, right? So a few other examples here include Venus flytrap and sundews. Now it is important to understand that pitcher plant is not heterotrophic. It is not completely heterotrophic. That means that its primary source of food is not the insect. Why is it feeding on insect? Because it requires nitrogen. But can it do photosynthesis? It can definitely do photosynthesis because we see that chlorophyll is present in such plants, which means that they have the ability to do photosynthesis. They are only capturing the insect to fulfill the nitrogen requirement, which is why in such case we often say that pitcher plants are partially heterotrophic and partially autotrophic in nature. And this right here is very important for us to understand. So students, with this we come to the end of this video where we have understood the different modes of heterotrophic mode of nutrition, where we learnt about parasitic mode, we learnt about insectivorous plants, lichens, right? And of course, okay, let's interchange these two. We see that we learnt about lichens, which exhibit symbiotic association, and of course, mushrooms or bread mold that exhibit saprotrophic mode, right? So this right here is saprotrophic. So I hope that all of you here have understood this clearly, and I hope that you found this particular video helpful. Here's a quick homework question for all of you that you can let me know in the comments of this particular video. Wheat dough, if left in the open, after a few days, starts to emit a foul smell and it becomes unfit to use. Give a reason as to what could have happened. Now this right here is with respect to whatever we have learnt about in this particular video, and very soon I will be featuring you as one of my homework warriors in my live class. So don't forget to let me know the answer in the comments of this video. So thank you so much everybody for staying with me till the very end. I hope you found this session helpful. If you did, don't forget to let me know in the comments. Hoping to see you all very soon. Up until then, take care students. Lots of love to all of you and bye-bye.